Got a submission here from HugoRogers. Hugo, by the way, thank you for your submission. Gave me the information I needed. PIDs, CLI dump, video, Blackbox log, and the offset. You gave me everything I could possibly ask for. One thing though, I looked at your CLI dump, and here it shows you're using rewrite, but you say you're using MW2.3, so I think your CLI dump must not be up to date. That's no problem. If I ignore your CLI dump, that's why. I don't think it's got the correct information in it. So let's take a look at your logs. One of the things you say is that your P term is higher than your D term, and that is indeed unusual. You would normally expect to see the P term oscillating around the 0 axis along with the D term. So if indeed the P term is consistently elevated, that is interesting and worth looking at. Okay, but we'll get there. Let's start by taking a look, as I always do, with your gyros. Again, we're just doing a general health check to see if everything is good, and everything looks amazing. Very thin lines, no problem at all whatsoever with noise. So you should be able to, as we were discussing in the previous submission, you may be able to run slightly higher D gains and get away with it. Everything, you shouldn't have problems with noise. You should not need excessive filtering. In fact, perhaps you could even reduce your filtering somewhat if you wanted to improve your handling. Although, frankly, Betaflight flies so good on the defaults, there's not a lot to complain about. So gyros are fine. Let's take a look at that pitch axis that you asked about and see if indeed the P term is higher. Now, where did you, is this, yeah, this is the exact same, thank you, this is so helpful. This is the exact same log that you took your screenshot from, and I can see right where your timestamp is and go right there. Now let's just look and see. See here, the P term is kind of doing what we would expect, but you're right that it's consistently elevated. Now here's what's strange about that. Oh, and what's going on with your I term? Yeah, okay. Here's what's strange about that. I would normally expect that if there was a persistent bias that needed to be compensated for, that the I term would compensate for that bias. And then the P term would be doing short-term back and forths around the 0 axis, and the I term would be riding high or riding low depending on the direction of the bias. And by bias, I mean, let's say that the simplest way to explain bias is that your CG is off. Now, I know you're flying a Krieger, so your CG is probably like really not off, but just go with the example. If you had your CG way forward, then the copter would want to pitch forward, and you would need more force in the forward motors to counteract that. And that would be a forward pitch bias, and the I term would go negative, and that would cause the front motors to spin up more and counteract that forward bias. So it's quite normal, again, completely normal in forward flight to see a positive I term. That's usual because of aerodynamic effects that result in the copter having a pitch forward moment or force. And by the way, the fact that we see this with a Krieger further reinforces the idea that it is aerodynamic effects and not a CG, because the Krieger is very centered on the CG on all the axes. But you don't normally see the P term rather, you don't normally see the P term riding high like this, and it's not all the time, but it is quite often we see it oscillating, and it is way above the 0 axis. So the P term actually is having a net positive force on the copter, which is quite unusual, and I don't know that I've ever seen that. So let's go back to the very beginning and see what happens before you take off. So before you take off, everything is zeroed as would be expected. And let's watch this at like 30% speed and watch what you do and what happens. Throttle goes up, pitch forward because of camera up tilt. Copter is climbing. Throttle is down, the copter is falling. Throttle's up. And the P term is already high. So you said, well, the P term is high, but riding above the D term. That's not how I would characterize it exactly. The P term is above the 0 axis. The D term is where you would expect it, at the 0 axis. The P term is not where you expect it, at the 0 axis. And that's what's strange here. Now here the P term dives. Got a little roll here. And again, throttle goes up, P term goes high. So the other thing I'm looking for is the gain, the P gain correct? And it feels like the P gain is close to correct because, for example, here we start to see the P term surging, right? Surging, and again, surging. Even when it's high, we can see it sort of surging here. Here, nice. This I like a lot. The look of this P term action here is quite nice. That's the sign of a P term that is in the right range. What's happening there? Anything happening? Oh, let me get our speed back to something a little more reasonable. I can hear a little bit of oscillation or harmonics in the motors, which I don't love. I bet we're going to find that on the yaw axis. It's really noisy here, really trashy here. Something's getting real. Maybe it's hard to judge. The D term is really noisy here. The rest of the time, the D term is very sedate, barely leaving the axis. So I wouldn't suggest lowering the D gain, but you could change your D term averaging, raise your D term averaging a little bit to help smooth some of that out. It's just it's just that the gyro and the P term get super noisy here as well. It might be. I know your gyros were so clean though, so it might be that your D term. Maybe you just accept that. Can we hear it in the motors? Yeah, you can hear it, so that's not great. I would want to try and smooth that out a little. So I can tell you that, yeah, I would want to smooth that out a little. That's not good. Let's listen to that. You hear how unsmooth those motors are? That's not the best. It's probably not affecting your flying too much. It's just when I hear that, I go, oh man, somebody's not paying too much attention to their tune. It's not great for the motors. It's not terrible for the motors, but it's not the best. So I would want to smooth that out a little. So the fact that the P term is positive indicates that there is a net pitch back force on the copter. Is that right? Yes, that's right. Yeah, positive pitch is forward pitch. I don't understand why the P term is behaving the way that it is and remaining persistently high. The only thing I can think of is that notice that the I term is a flat line here. So normally, here's what I got. Here's what I think. If there is persistent error, the I term rises, and the I term corrects for the error, and that means the error is reduced, and then the P term returns to 0. But it looks like your I term is sort of pegged. Do you see how it's just staying? And in fact, can we go down far enough that hang on. Where is it? PID-I, so pitch. It's at 44. Does it just stay at 4? Yeah. Look at this. It's just at 44. Let's watch it. 44. Oh, there it changed. And 44. 44. So your pitch I term is being capped at 44 for some reason. You have to ask Boris why. And as a result, because that is not enough to fully correct for this persistent bias, this pitch back bias, the P term is being forced to pick up some of that error as well. That's my interpretation of what's happening. So I would want to look at why the pitch I term was being capped and not being allowed to climb higher in order to correct for this bias. Now, one of the things that Boris has said is that when the I term is failing to produce the desired result, there's no point in letting it continue to rise. But the thing is that it sure looks like we have a lot of motor authority left to work with to help spin up the front motors and spin down the back motors and sort this problem out and let the I term rise a little more, or the other way around, spin up the back motors, spin down the front motors, and help correct for this. But that's why your P term is positive like that, because the I term is being capped. And since the I term can't go any higher, the only way to then compensate for that pitch back force is for the P term to rise as well. But that's not ideal. You don't generally want that to happen. You want the I term compensating for persistent bias and the P term compensating for short-term bias, short-term error around the bias point. Yeah. All right. So that's what I got for that. Did I miss anything? Did I get everything? Hold on. Yeah, your P gain looks pretty good on pitch. I gain, maybe raise I gain? Is I being capped because your I gain is not high enough? What's your I gain? 23 is not, oh yeah, there you go. Okay, so there you go. 23 is really not very high on I gain. So I would raise the I gain and see if that fixes the problem by allowing the I term to have more authority to fix the bias. It may allow the P term to then return back to the 0 axis, because it's like if you're working with somebody in an office and they're not doing their work right, then all their papers end up on your desk. You can tell them, I'm not a blue-collar worker, or I would have said in a factory. Sorry. Right. So if your boss gives you 10 jobs to work on and they do 2 and then they go home, then you got 8, right? And that's what's happening right now. The P term is having to do the I term's job because the I term is not adequately doing its job. So give the I term more authority. Change this from 23 to 45. Like, because I've tuned multi-weight 2.3 before, I can guess what your I term value might sort of end up at. Change that to 45 and see if the P term on pitch goes back down to where it needs to be. And your roll P term will probably end up being a little higher as well, but there's not usually a persistent bias on roll like there is on pitch, because the aerodynamic effects are different. And sure enough, the P term is centered. But yeah, again, we see good surging action on the P term here. A little bit of noise on the D term. So same advice I would give you. It feels like your P term could be a little more active on pitch, maybe. It feels like you're in the ballpark though. Or roll. I'm a mess tonight. Yeah, see these surges like this on the roll P term? Good. That tells me you're in the ballpark. The D term is a little noisy, maybe a little more D term filtering, maybe a little less D gain. You don't need a lot of D gain. D of 20 and 15. Try taking your D down to like 10 on both of them. See if that settles down the D term a little. See if you notice a difference in like flips and rolls. If you get more bounce back or something, or if you don't even notice the difference. Alrighty. Well, thank you for a very interesting submission. Hope that's helpful. Happy flying.